G'day guys, welcome to the Boundary Riders podcast, episode 120, and of course with only about a month or so to go before the season is over and we get to finals, we have a lot to talk about today. We're going to be taking a look at some interesting information regarding an in-season tournament that is being talked about coming to the AFL, big injury carnage over the weekend, and so much more. So let's roll the intro and get straight into the new episode. Welcome to the Boundary Riders podcast, your one-stop shop for all your AFL content needs.
He looks at his options, and Jack Ginnivan says, boys, you brought me to the club to do just this!
But this guy has Flog written all over him.
From attack down, Reed sprints away from Petrarca, leaves him in his wake, takes a second bounce, takes a third. The sheer arrogance of Harley Reid. Finish the job, young man!
So let's get into the footy news from the week that was. So guys, I think it's pretty safe to say last week was a bit of a blunder on the AFL front. The top 9 teams played against the bottom 9 teams, and as you would expect, most of the games were pretty fucking dismal, I'd be honest. They were pretty bad games. The Swans Fremantle game was probably the best game by far, I would say, and it's funnily enough that was seen at the start of the week. Swans were very good, really impressed by their performance. I guess I wanted to start off with a little bit of Sydney, so to speak, because I think a lot of people now think that the only team that can make finals outside of the top 9 are the Swans, and I think they could potentially, but I really hope they don't try to push players back from injury. We'll get to a few of them in a moment, but I really hope they don't rush players back to try and get them back to because the Swans will be somewhat still in the finals race. I really hope they leave them aside, and if they do make it by some chance, the Swans, great, but if they don't, just leave them for next year. Let's be honest, Sydney aren't going to win the premiership from here. They're way too far away. They're going to have to play out of their skin for the rest of the season just to make finals. So for them to, play these different players that may be under an injury cloud and then they get injured, I feel like it's a bit of a waste. So personally, I think the Swans should leave a couple of players out if they are somewhat injury prone. Let them go have a full preseason next year, and hopefully they can rocket back up the ladder. We saw how Collingwood did it last year, and somewhat the Crows, I would say, but more Collingwood, how they went from the premiership in 2023, went down to 9th, had some issues, quickly solved them along with picking up some players in the trade period, and now look at them, they're the premiership favourites by a country mile. So I hope that's what Sydney tried to do, and not try to push to try and get a 8th spot and then get eliminated in round 1. Might as well try to make finals, but if they don't try and force it, in my opinion. But we'll just see how that plays out. I did like how the Swans played last week. It does seem over the last 3 or 4 weeks that Dean Cox has started to get a bit of an identity with his coaching, which is something that I complained about a month ago. That it's a lot more of a pressure game of football rather than it was sort of a slow, methodical sort of football that the Swans were playing about 2 months ago. Now, granted, they do have a lot of players back, which is great. Errol Goulden has been an absolute gun since he returned, which is, what the Swans needed. But other than that, they needed to have a game plan, and their pressure game over the last few weeks, even though they lost to the Dogs 2 weeks ago, that was still great. They look like they got the players in the positions that they need them, and I think overall, Sydney, there are some good signs ahead. So I'm not too concerned, especially as much as I was, about 2 months ago. I was very concerned, but now we seem all good. News and injury topics throughout the week. So first of all, we'll start with the Swans players. Tom Papley has got away with it somewhat, I would say. It is a low-grade hamstring strain. He's probably going to be out for 2 to 3 weeks, but the big news for the Sydney Swans is the fact that Joel Amartey is set to miss the rest of the season. Unless they do make finals, then maybe there's a chance of him returning. But he's done a high-grade adductor strain, suffered against the Dockers late in that game. There was only about 2 minutes to go. He's stretched in a marking contest and pulled his groin, and unfortunately it seems that he's going to miss the rest of the season. Now, people who don't watch many Swans games would probably think that this isn't such a big deal. Joel Amartey, who cares? He missed 6 goals 3 weeks ago, so, he's trash. And that's how my brother was like, oh, who cares? It's only Joel Amartey. But he kicked the most amount of goals for Sydney last year in their grand final season, and this season, when he's been in the Swans lineup, he has been very, very good. But unfortunately, he hasn't been able to stay consistently out on the field. So unfortunate there for Joel. Hopefully, like I said a little earlier, don't rush him back. If he can somewhat get up in round 23 and 24 and there's a risk, don't risk it. Let him have a full preseason, because this guy, I think, Hayden McLean's been a little bit off this year. I think this is the guy who can, rule the roost in the forward line. I think he's a true full forward sort of player. He leads out, to the kicker. He's a good mark. And I think this is the guy that Sydney need to continue to persevere with. I think McLean is definitely a good player at his best, but when he does go missing, he is unsighted throughout games. I think that Joel Amartey's the guy that the Swans have to persist with a key forward, and Logan McDonald, and McLean comes in third. Hopefully Sydney can look to maybe recruit another key forward in the off season, but I think that Amartey and McDonald are the two that the Swans have to persevere with going forward, and then McLean is that third. That's my opinion anyway. A couple of other injury concerns. Unfortunately, it has been confirmed that Sam Powell-Pepper has ruptured his ACL, so he'll miss the rest of the season, probably a bit of 2026 as well. It was pretty sad to hear Ken Hinkley after the game as well say that it's the last time he's going to coach him. So really disappointing for Sam Powell-Pepper. Did an injury, an ACL last year. So hopefully he can come back and have somewhat of an impact in 2026. But he is such an important player for Port Adelaide. My brother was such a big talker regarding Sam Powell-Pepper returning this season. And now that he's going to be out for the rest of the year, it's going to be tough. He's such a big team man as well. Every single player at Port Adelaide loves him. So he's going to be sorely missed. Now Richmond can confirm that Sam Lawler has been ruled out for the remainder of the season following a hamstring injury against the Cats. We'll get to that a little bit later regarding a bit of a rant I'm going to go on. But really sad news for him. Zach Reid and Jai Caldwell both are undergoing surgery this week to repair respective hamstring injuries, and Sid Moses injury as well. Reid will miss the remainder of the season. Really sad for Zach Reid. He just can't get on the field. And Jai Caldwell return will be determined at a later date. So he won't be playing for at least the next week or two, I would say. And sad news, well, sort of sad news, sort of good news. We obviously saw Jeremy McGovern retire through concussion a couple of weeks ago after going to the concussion panel or whatever it was, the league's concussion panel, and Nick Cox was going there as well from Essendon. Now, he will miss the remainder of the 2025 season. The panel did provide a clear return date pathway for him. One recommendation was that he misses the remainder of the season, and both him and the club have agreed to those terms. So hopefully he can come back and have some sort of meaningful impact. It was a pretty high draftee for Essendon, so hopefully he can come back and have an impact, but it's going to be tough. Hopefully he can come back to some sort of, meaningful way for the Bombers, but also he can't risk his, health either. So we'll just have to wait and see. Now, some good news on the Adelaide Crows. It does seem that Josh Richelli has avoided a ACL injury, but still unsure as to the, ramifications of said injury. There does seem he will be going into surgery, so may miss the rest of the season, but still no real clarification on a return date just yet, so we'll just have to wait and see there for Josh. Now let's move into a couple of news topics. Now, the first one I want to take a look at is regarding Sunday's game against Melbourne and the Crows. You may not have seen this goal review. This was in the last quarter, I believe, when the Demons were somewhat trying to make a bit of a comeback. Ben Keys threw his boot at a ball, kicked a goal in the goal square, and it was called a goal. They reviewed it for quite a while on Judd McVie potentially touching it and Stephen May. The call at the end was a goal, and from the vision that we all saw, it was a goal. It didn't look touched at all. However, if you rewind the tape about 5 seconds, you see the first touch from McVie that is touched and gone through for a behind. So the AFL have done their trademark move of apologising post-game and saying it was wrong. How many times do we have to fucking deal with the ARC getting it wrong? All they had to do was rewind the tape 3 seconds maybe, and they would have seen that Judd McVie touched it. Now, granted, as someone who has robbed the Crows game as a supporter of the Swans, obviously a couple of years ago with the ball hit the post, I'm sure the Crows deserve to get one back their way. And look, it didn't really manipulate the result in the end. The Demons weren't going to win. But still, the fact that the ARC makes this kind of mistake, I know it's a tired argument, but what happens if this happened in a grand final? There would be huge uproar. So the fact that this was not caught by the ARC, all they had to do was rewind to when he kicked the ball, Ben Keys, and you would have seen that McVie got a fingertip to it. All they had to do was just rewind it, and the AFL, of course, trademark move, we apologise for this mistake, we got it wrong. Yeah, good on you. Doesn't really make a difference when it costs teams games. Now, yes, it didn't cost Melbourne. Crows were still going to win, and they probably deserve something to go their way, Adelaide, in these sort of instances. But also, you've got to get it right. And that's what the arc is there for, to, get right the blunder. And it didn't get it on this occasion. So very disappointing from the AFL. It's getting pretty tiresome, really, if I'm being honest. Now on some other news, it does seem that the AFL are going to be persistent in keeping bye rounds as a longer period rather than getting it out of the way in 2 or 3 weeks. They want to try and spread it out. So AFL CEO and Andrew Dillon said his opinion for this year was to maybe have 1 less week of byes, but he does like the weekends that they're having at the moment with at least 7 games. So that does mean that they're going to probably keep it as 4 teams having a bye per week. So obviously 2 games taken away, which I really don't like. I would rather them get them out of the way. I would prefer, personally, is if we had like some sort of game in the middle of the year, like a state of origin or whatever it has to be. I don't care. But have something in the middle of the year and every single AFL team gets a bye at once. We just get it out of the way and then we go to the rest of the season. It makes it the most fair because every single team will be coming back after the bye with, that pretty similar, days off. It's between 12 to 14, you would think. I think that makes it the most sense and is the most fair. I don't know why he wants to have it spread out between, 5 weeks this year? Between round 12 to 16, we had byes. It was just ridiculous. And then we come back the week after, round 17, for the first, week going into the rest of the season. It was an absolute dismal round of football, really. I got all my full tips, so I was pretty happy with that. But as a spectacle, other than the Swans game, most of them we could tell in the first 20 minutes, this game's shit, I'm turning it off. Now, I had to watch the games because I had to do the Boundary Riders medal votes. Luckily, I could get my brother to do the Thursday night game because that was, North Melbourne responded a little bit, but they still got smashed by 40 points? It's like, who cares? I don't know why they make these sort of decisions. So I think that's dumb, to be fair. I think they should just go, like I said, just get it out of the way in 1 week. Maybe do a split round and split it into 2. 9 teams off, 10 teams and then 8 or whatever they have to do. But to spread it out over 5 weeks is so annoying because it just cuts down the amount of games. And that's what most supporters want. They want football games. They don't want to, have their team 6 games in a round and 7 and then there's an 8, but then there's 5 and it's just confusing. So overall, I'm not a fan of the idea. I think they should get rid of it in one foul swoop. But now we get to a topic that has been coming out over the week regarding an in-season tournament into the AFL. So the AFL is considering introducing a secondary tournament that would run during the premiership season, awards millions of dollars as prize money, and could even offer a winning team a spot in the finals. Now, the idea first suggested 18 months ago was raised by the AFL again with their heavyweights, with also Andrew Dillon. And this could potentially come into the AFL when Tasmania joined the competition as the 19th team in 2028. Now, the way that this could work is they would have it through intervals of the AFL season, maybe at the start, maybe have a couple of games, then cut it into the middle, and then towards the finals. Or they just have a little patch, like a month, in between June to July, something like that. And then they have the tournament there. So we have the first half of the season, tournament, second half of the season, something like that. So that's the 2 ideas. And it also seems that the NBA started something like this in 2023, would keep struggling teams and their fans engaged in the season longer, with the winning team could be rewarded up to maybe $5 million, according to some sources. Now, I have actually made a video regarding a AFL Cup or a tournament, I think it was last year, or one of my first video essays that I ever did. And looking at it now, I thought that it would be a good idea back at the time. I really don't like the way they're implementing this idea, the way they're talking about it in the middle of a season. I think that takes away from the AFL itself, the competition that we all grew up watching. I personally think it could work as a pre-season tournament, that you use it as a getting your team ready for the AFL season, which is the mainstay, the main event. That I think could work. Make the NAB Cup, bring it back. Bring the Wizard Cup back. Make it a pre-season tournament to then get your team ready for the season. I don't like the idea of putting it in the middle of the year. You either put it through the year. I think that you have it split around, similar to maybe the FA Cup in soccer. as they have it in the AFL. Like you play games midweek, maybe that's how you could do it. But even then, I don't really like that idea either. Personally, I think that you don't do this. I think this is a bad idea. Now, Sam McClure has reported, I fucking hate this cunt. Anyway, the AFL would want to strip it back to everyone plays each other once. So the main reason why the AFL are thinking of this is because they would cut away games from the AFL season and then they would have these tournaments. So every single team plays each other once in the AFL campaign, except for your rival, you play twice as like a rivalry round. Now, and you'd also have a gather round, in fact, and then an in-season tournament with worth a lot of money, potentially a final spot for the winner. Now, I think that's not a very great idea either, because if how are you going to get a final spot if Collingwood wins that? Like, let's say it was this year, right? If Collingwood won this tournament in tomorrow, because it's supposed to be like the mid-season. We're in July now. Let's say Collingwood win the tournament tomorrow night. Who cares? So it just meant nothing the whole year. Who's going to watch that? Because to say that they're going to keep other fans engaged, that's great in theory. But what happens if they win the FA Cup and they win the AFL's FA Cup and they win the AFL Premiership, or they're on top of the ladder? It's going to mean absolutely nothing, and it's just going to make the top teams more richer while it lessens the opportunities for the lower teams. I don't think this is great at all. In fact, thinking more about it, this is an incredibly bad idea because it's going to make the better teams more incentivized to try out these tournaments to get more money for their clubs. Because let's say you put a Collingwood against a North Melbourne in round 18, we know Collingwood are going to win. Why would they rest players Collingwood if they're playing against North Melbourne when there's a huge money prize for the competition? That's why I think personally it would be a great idea for a pre-season sort of tournament. If they want to do something like this, make it a pre-season tournament. Make it so teams aren't going to use their best players all the time. They will maybe for the bigger finals towards the end of the season, but they're not going to use them for the first couple of games. That means every single person who are like big AFL fans can watch their teams, look at their young players, see how they're going to go. That's the only way I think it can be implemented. I don't like the idea of having it through the season because it cheapens the AFL competition as a whole, in my opinion. People like Sam McClure, because I don't know why he wants to be like the Kane Cornes that's never played football, so his opinion for most people means less, but he's like, we have to seriously consider this. It's like, no, we don't. This is not a good idea because, like I said, it cheapens the AFL competition as a whole, and look at how the AFL is at the moment with injuries, by the way. Players are getting injured left, right, and center, and then we're just going to add this in the middle of the year? No way. That's going to make it even worse. Imagine if your best players get injured in this tournament, and then towards the end of the year, you just capitulate. Like, imagine if you're a Collingwood fan. I know I bring up Collingwood a lot, but what happens if in this tournament you bring in, maybe you want to rest them, but if you want to go for this big money prize of maybe a 5 million, I don't know how much it will be, but what you risk a Nick Dacos. He does his ACL, and then you risk a Jamie Elliott, let's say. You've risked those two. They do season-ending injuries. You've just cost yourself a premiership, and you may have lost the tournament as well. There are so many issues that I have with this that it just cheapens the AFL competition, and you're risking so much for a little prize in between. I just don't like the idea at all. And to say that it's going to make other teams more, teams down the bottom, give them more of a engagement, I don't really necessarily buy into that sort of statement because I think that overall, every single team will want to get the money, right? Yes, you may want to go for the premiership, the AFL season, you may want to rest players, that's understandable. But what happens if the top teams go and win this tournament and they're getting the cash prize? So the bottom teams are going to be the distance between the top teams and the bottom teams is just going to continually grow that gap. Because, look at it this season. There's 9 teams that are going to make finals, and then the other 9 teams are doing nothing. So why would you want to... Yes, the other 9 teams could potentially say, okay, we're going to forget about the AFL season and focus on the AFL Cup, whatever you want to call it, right? So that means that the rest of the AFL season, these bottom teams are just going to give up on their AFL season and focus on the tournament stuff. So you look at that, look at the Sydney Swans, right? If Sydney didn't care about the AFL season anymore and were only focused on this AFL Cup, then Sydney, do you really think they win last week against Fremantle? Do you really think they're going to give a huge go at it and, the pressure game that they brought, why would they give a crap about that? It just lessens the impact of the AFL season. So I think it's a terrible idea, to be honest. And I'm usually pretty open to these sort of new innovations in the AFL. Like last week, I was okay with the idea of a wild card round, to be honest. I think it could be a good idea to keep the season alive and keep other teams engaged. I think that's a good idea. If you want other teams and other fans to be engaged, I think that's the route you go down. An in-season tournament, I think, is a terrible idea. I think, like I said, I'll just say this one more time, it cheapens the competition, the AFL, which is what the fans are wanting, and it's going to make a bigger gap on the best teams and the worst teams. Like, how many years do we have to see North Melbourne down the bottom? If you're giving other teams up the top a cash prize, then they're just going to continue to break away from the teams like the North Melbournes, the St Kildas. And I'm talking about those sort of clubs because they're the Victorian clubs that have been down the bottom for so long, right? So why would you want to make that gap even more just to potentially have some sort of tournament in the middle of the year that, North Melbourne could win it and could keep those fans engaged? But what happens if a Brisbane or a Collingwood or a Geelong wins that tournament? Then it just makes those teams even stronger and makes the teams like the North Melbournes of the world even weaker. That's my opinion. That's my thoughts. I would like to hear your guys' opinion on this because most people at this stage I have seen hate this idea. I would like to actually see a perspective of someone who likes the idea, to be honest, because I would like to hear their perspective because I don't think this is a good idea at all. I think that it's just going to make the AFL season worse and it's going to make it less of an impact. Imagine going to win the AFL Premiership and, by round, let's say Collingwood, they drop off in form this year and then someone wins it. So that would be different to if this tournament thing was involved. Nick Dacos and Jamie Elliott get injured. Collingwood's form then drops off and then they lose the grand final. I think it makes it a lot different. It's like, oh, well, Collingwood would have won the premiership, but their injuries they got in the AFL Cup, that's the reason why they couldn't win it. I just think I think it overall takes away from the AFL competition as a whole, and I don't think that's the right route to go down. I personally think if the AFL want to keep the other fans engaged, you go with a wild card round. You don't do this tournament. If they're going to do a tournament like this in the AFL space, you have to do it in the pre-season. I don't even think you can do it post-season because I think everyone would just the footy fatigue kind of sets in after the grand final, right? That's why I think a lot of people don't really watch the AFLW is because of football fatigue. I think there's other reasons as well, but overall I think that's where football fatigue comes in. Everyone at the end of the grand final, it's like, oh, okay, that's a great end to the AFL season, or not last year because Sydney fucking blew it in the grand final day, but overall people are like, oh, well that, we have the winner now. So that's why I think it's a pre-season only sort of thought, in my opinion. Again, let me know down below how you guys, if you think it's a good idea, seriously, make sure let me know how you feel because I want to know why, personally, because I seriously can't see a good reason for an in-season AFL tournament that coincides with the AFL season. I can't see a good reason for it. So if you do have a good reason why it's good, seriously tell me because I want to actually have some ideas as to why it's good. Let's move on and get to the tips for the round. So of course, big round coming up, a lot of massive games. Overall, I think there's 8 out of 9 games that could go either way. The Carlton-Brisbane game, I think, is an absolute bloodbath. Brisbane will absolutely cream the Blues. But other than that, I think there's some big games. This will definitely decide some teams who are going to be making finals, making top 4, and ones that are going to be missing those big chances, those big positions on the ladder. So now, let's get into the preview to the new round. Probably the biggest round of football coming up. We have so many big games to cover. We'll be covering 4 of the biggest. All of them seem to have finals ramifications going into the rest of the year. And we're going to be starting with probably the game of the round, the Gold Coast up against Collingwood at Friday night. This game, I think, is going to be an absolute blockbuster. This is on the Gold Coast, both teams coming off of wins. However, the last 2 wins from the Suns have been against Melbourne and Essendon, so not exactly massive wins, if I'm being honest. While the Pies over the past month have really had an easy run of games. But with that being said, they are by far the best team in the competition right now. Now, does that mean maybe because they've had a pretty easy run, they could be complacent? I'm not really sure. There is a chance that the Pies will rest a few players because the game is up in Queensland, and if that is the case, case, it definitely opens the door for the Suns to cause a bit of an upset. But I think the big matchup of this game, and probably the biggest matchup for the rest of the year going into the rest of the Collingwood games, is who goes to Nick Dacos. Now, the Suns aren't exactly a massive tagging team. As we saw last week, Zach Merritt had an absolute blinder, just free roams throughout the entirety of the afternoon, had 35 plus touches. And yes, that didn't exactly cost them. The Gold Coast still won the game. But if they let Nick Dacos just roam around the ground for the entirety of the contest, unchecked, the Pies will walk away with an easy win. Now, the two players that come to mind, in my opinion, to tag Nick Dacos is probably the biggest one in Touk Miller. Hasn't done it a lot this season. However, in years gone by, has been really good at shutting down some of the best key midfielders in the competition. But the other player that comes to mind, which I think is a little bit of an outsider, a little bit left of field, is Bodie Hewlin. I think if he has the aerobic capacity to stay with Nick Dacos, run around and keep with him all game, I think he's the perfect matchup for Dacos. Now, I don't know how good a runner Bodie Hewlin is, but we have seen lockdown defenders in more recent times do some run with roles with midfielders with decent success. Think of Michael Annie with the Crows. He's done it a few times this season to success. And in more recent times, Miles Bergman with Port Adelaide, who has probably been the best of them. If Bodie Hewlin does have the engine to stick with Nick Dacos throughout the night, I think he's the perfect matchup for him. If Dacos drifts forward, we've seen how good a defender Hewlin is. And if he can stay with him around the ground, Hewlin's quite a big-bodied guy. So I think he'd be able to push Dacos into stoppage to not let him be able to roam around the ground. The question is, though, can Bodie Hewlin run with him? I'm not exactly sure. So it probably does mean that Touk Miller, if anyone is going to tag Dacos, it's probably him. But I wouldn't mind seeing the Gold Coast experiment here and maybe give Hewlin a go. Now, with that being said, I'm going to be picking Collingwood. Despite the Gold Coast coming off 2 wins in the past few weeks, I really don't trust their form. They've been able to beat up on teams below them pretty convincingly this year, but so far throughout the season, they have really struggled against teams around them. We've seen them only beat a couple of them this year, and 2 of those games are up in Darwin where they just don't lose. So I think even though Collingwood are probably vulnerable in this matchup to an extent, and especially if they do rest some players, I simply can't pick against them. I think they're the best team in the competition, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to tip against them this year. Unless they do have a big injury crisis, I think they're going to be hard to pick against the rest of the season. However, my brother has picked the Gold Coast Suns in a bit of an upset. He has said that Collingwood have to travel outside of Victoria, which is, the first time they've had to do it this year, I think. Maybe they had to do it once earlier in the season, but yeah, he's probably right about that. This is probably the second or third time they've left Victoria. Cue all the Collingwood commenters in the comment section getting angry at me. But he does also bring up the fact they may rest a few players. Now, the Suns have beaten the Pies at home last year, and he's taking a bit of a punt on this one, but he does see that the Gold Coast could be able to cause an upset. So I think this is a very 50-50 game. And speaking of 50-50s, Dogs v Adelaide Saturday afternoon. Probably the 2 most exciting teams in the competition in terms of offense, and 2 big contenders this year in my eyes. Now, both teams are coming into this game with good form, only having 1 loss in their past 5 games. Both teams have struggled to knock off other contenders so far this season, though, and have really relied on beating up on the bottom teams to see themselves sitting comfortably in the top 8 at the moment. However, in the context of this season, I think the loser of this game will miss the top 4. I really can't see both of these teams being in the top 4 at the end of the season. So first of all, I think the big matchup for Adelaide is to tag Ed Richards. We saw the Swans do this a couple of weeks ago to great effect, and even though the Swans didn't win that game, they were very close, and I think it went a big way to be within a couple of kicks of that matchup. Just being able to shut down his scorer involvements. When the Dogs score, he is involved so much, Ed Richards, so they have to shut him down. Now, I think the pretty obvious matchup for him is James Peatling, maybe Michael Annie, but I think Peatling's probably the big matchup for him. But I think the big question mark for both teams is on Adelaide, can the Crows compete in the engine room with the star-studded midfielders of the Dogs? While on the Dogs' point of view, can their defence contain the potent forward line of the Adelaide Crows? And for me, this is what splits both the teams, and is why I'm actually picking the outsiders in Adelaide. Now, I know the Dogs are really, really good at the Marvel Stadium. However, I think Adelaide's defence is not being talked about enough. I actually think the Crows' defence has been the most improved out of any defensive lineup throughout the entirety of the AFL. And I think they have what it takes to knock off the Western Bulldogs. I don't think it's going to be easy. I think it's going to be a very close game. But I do actually see the Crows winning this one at Marvel Stadium. However, my brother has gone with the Dogs. He has said that the Western Bulldogs at Marvel Stadium this year have looked way too good. He thinks the Crows are probably one big midfielder short of being able to compete in the gut. starts with the Dogs midfielders. And in his opinion, he thinks the Dogs need a bit of a scalp, and this is probably the game to do it. I think this is another 50-50 game. It's such a good contest. This is, after having such a poor round 17, all the games are easy to tip, let's be honest. Now we finally get a round that I think we're going to have some massive blockbusters. Next up, another big game, GWS up against Geelong. I think this is one of the more intriguing contests of the round. GWS, the last 3 weeks have been outstanding in my opinion, while the Cats hit a little bit of a wall against the Lions a few weeks ago before thumping the Tigers last week. Now, unfortunately for GWS, they have lost their 2 lockdown defenders, which means it's going to be super tough for GWS to stop the likes of Cameron and Shannon Neal. However, the Giants should get back Jesse Hogan and Lockie Whitfield, which would definitely add to their experience in the lineup. And a good thing for the Giants is the fact that they have a very good record against Geelong. They've won their last 3 encounters against them, so they have the wood over the Cats in more recent times. Now, on a few key matchups, I think Aaliyah will probably go to Jezza Cameron. And my brother thinks that the Giants will tag Max Holmes. Probably Bedford would be the matchup. However, hasn't really done that in more recent times. Has been a lot more off his half-forward role. But I wouldn't be surprised if that sort of matchup eventuates throughout the game. But I think the biggest matchup of this one is maybe a little bit of a surprising one, a little bit left of field for some of you, which is a tagging job on Finn Callaghan. Since his return in the past 3 weeks, the Giants have been getting back to winning ways. Before that point, they were losing against teams like Port Adelaide, which isn't simply good enough. So if the Giants are any chance of winning this game against the odds, I think he needs to have an absolute blinder like he did last week against the Eagles. Oyson Mullen is the guy who should run with him. We've seen him do a tagging job very well against Nick Dacos earlier in the year, and I think that he needs to do this again against Callaghan. Now, I will be picking the Cats as I can't see the Giants being able to stop both Cameron and Shannon Neal with the outs to their backline. However, I don't think this is exactly straightforward for the Cats either. I think this will be a very close one. Now, my brother is also tipping the Cats. He has said that Bailey Smith should be back, and with the Giants having a lot of players out at the moment, Buckley and Taylor being the biggest, he can't see the Giants pulling this off, and that's kind of where I'm sitting as well. But now to the final game we're going to be taking a deep dive into, which is Freo up against Hawthorn. And to be honest, this game is a final in July for the Dockers. After dropping the game last week against Sydney, if they drop this game at home against the Hawks, they are going to struggle to make the 8. Now, the Dockers' recent record against Hawthorn is actually pretty good. They've won 6 of their past 7 games against them, and both teams have won 4 of their last 5 games, so both of them are coming in with pretty good form. But I want to revisit something that I actually said last week with Caleb Sarong. If you stop Sarong, you stop Fremantle. And look exactly what happened. James Jordan locked away Caleb Sarong, and I think that's the big matchup that got the Swans the win in the end. And I think that Hawthorn have to do the same and lock him down. Now, McGuinness has had this type of role in the past. However, he's been in the VFL for quite a bit now. So I think it's a big ask for a player to come up to AFL level and take down one of the best midfielders in the competition. So I think the man to shut down Caleb Sarong is actually Connor Nash. He's a great two-way runner. He's a big-bodied midfielder, having a good year. And when Freo are on their run of 6 wins in a row, Caleb Sarong was in the red hottest of form. So if the Hawks are going to go to Perth and cause an upset, then I think they have to stop him. And after last week with the Hawks letting Nasai Wangan and Miller have 43 touches and over 1,000 metres gained, I really don't think Sam Mitchell's going to let another player get away like that again and get on top of his team. Even though this is in WA, and even though Freo have had pretty good form before last week, I'm going to be going with the Hawks. After a little bit of a down period about a month ago, Hawthorn have really hit some good form in the past month, knocking off 2 contenders in the Western Bulldogs and Adelaide in the process. I actually think they can get the job done over the Dockers. I've really lost a lot of trust over them over the last week. I didn't tip them last week, but I said that if they beat the Swans, they gain a lot of trust for me. They lost it, and I've lost trust for the Fremantle. Now, my brother has gone with the Dockers. He has said that playing back in Perth does help. He does say that Sarong does need to lift if they want to play finals, but he thinks that the Dockers midfield depth will just be too much for the Hawthorn mids. So a couple of big tips this week, guys. We've gone a bit different, me and my brother. So now let's get into our full tips for round 18. So my tips are the Lions to beat Carlton, Collingwood to beat the Gold Coast Suns, Adelaide to beat the Dogs, the Cats to beat GWS, Essendon to beat Richmond, Hawthorn to beat Fremantle, Melbourne to beat North Melbourne, the Swans to beat St Kilda, and Port Adelaide to beat the West Coast Eagles. And my brother's tips for round 18 are the Lions to beat Carlton, the Gold Coast to beat Collingwood, the Dogs to beat the Crows, the Cats to beat the Giants, the Bombers to beat Richmond, the Dockers to beat Hawthorn, Melbourne to beat North Melbourne, Sydney to beat the Saints, and Port Adelaide to beat the Eagles. Now on to our certainty tips for this week. I am picking Port Adelaide to beat the Eagles. Of course, Port Adelaide losing to the Lions last week. And my brother is tipping Essendon to beat the Tigers. Of course, the Dons losing to the Gold Coast last week. But now, guys, with that being said, let's finally take a look at the tipping ladder for this week. I got a perfect round and put my joker on it. A full 18 tips. I have jumped all the way from, I think I was 13th or 14th last week into 3rd. What a jump up from me. I am a genius, obviously. Now, obviously just fucking around a little, but like I said, I needed to make a big move, and that joke around, I couldn't have done much better. Now, the margin wasn't great. My margin isn't sitting good at all, so I'm going to have to win by 1 tip over Leviticus. He did get 8 out of 9, so he did miss 1 game. I think he tipped the Dockers. So did Braxton Vu. He has jumped up. He nearly got a perfect round with the Joker as well. He tipped the Dockers. What are you guys thinking? Of course the Swans were going to win that game. But overall, big jump up from me and Braxton. Jumped right back in the race. It's only 4 tips. I think this round is going to decide who can contend for the tipping league this year, guys, or who is going to drop right off, because there are so many 50-50 contests. I think we covered all the 50-50s. Even the St Kilda Sydney game could be big. Port Adelaide have a couple of players out against the West Coast Eagles. I don't think that one's really could change, but you know, you never know. North Melbourne against Melbourne could go either way. Probably the only game that I think's a certainty at this point is Carlton against Brisbane. I think Brisbane flogged them, to be honest. Other than that, I think it's a big round coming up. Shocker last week. We're back to a round that we actually want to watch. Make sure to let me know down below, guys, your tips going into this week. Actually, no. Make sure to let me know down below what tips you had before watching this video, because of course now you've changed them to what I already have, because I've got 2 perfect rounds in a row, guys. If I go 3 in a row, I should be getting 1 million views on these videos, because I just can predict the rest of the season at this point. But overall, I'm having a bit of fun with you guys. Thank you for watching this episode of the preview, of course, for round 18. Up next, of course, we have my brother's betting segment. So I didn't actually say it this week. It's kind of become tradition lately that I say that, you know, my brother's not here for this episode. I thought I'd leave it out this time, because at this point, he's not coming back. All right, I've kicked him out. He sucks. It's a solo podcast now. But eventually, at some point, he should be able to come back. I think he's just been having a lot of work stuff lately, and I can't really push. We can't do it Monday, and I think if we push it back any further than a Tuesday night when I do it, then we're just really covering stuff that's old news. So that's why we kind of do it on a Tuesday night at the latest. So we may move it to Wednesday next season, potentially. But, you know, his work schedule just swaps and changes. But luckily for us, he's still able to do our betting segment for the round. So let's get into my bros bets for round 18.
As always, we'll start with our same game multi for Thursday night footy. Carlton v Brisbane at Marvel. First leg is Nick Haynes for 15 plus disposals. Second leg is Jared Berry for 15 plus disposals. Third leg is Josh Dunkley for 20 plus disposals. And the last legs are Zach Bailey for 1 goal and 15 plus disposals, valued at $3.30. My certainty bet this week, I'm taking Andrew Brayshaw to pick up 25 plus disposals against the Hawks on Saturday night, valued at $1.35. And my outside the boundary bet this week, I'm taking Archer May to kick 3 plus goals against the Tigers on Saturday, valued at $5.20. And as always, guys, get responsibly.
Next up, of course, we get to our fantasy review for the week, and decent week from me, I will say. I've been able to jump up on the ladder on the competition for the channel, so really happy with that. If you haven't seen the review already, here's the review for AFL Fantasy for round 17. Overall, not a great week, but not a bad week either. Ranked in the end, 12,815 after a score of 2,199. Now, of course, I think every single person in the AFL Fantasy landscape had Bailey Smith out, of course, a late withdrawal. I think it's the 3rd time this season it has occurred. A lot of people probably would have had him as captain as well, so sorry if you guys were doing something at that point, or were watching the Geelong Richmond game, or, you know, we're not even watching any part of it, any sort of news regarding that game, but he was a laid out, which may have cost people a few double scores, or at least being able to pick a different vice captain. However, I was able to change mine in time and pick Max Holmes, who got 122 in the end, so a pretty good score. Now, on some positives throughout the week, Connor Rosie with the 111, very lovely. Colby McKercher with the 124, what a performance from him. He's been a great pickup for me. 132 to Nick Dacos. Tom Green, thank God he saved his score, scored 50-odd in the last quarter to get to 104 in his first game for my team. Rowan Marshall with the 140, very nice job from him. Rankin with the 100 after 5 goals, and 97 to Chad Warner, pretty good. Pete Ling with the 90, which I liked as well. Now, there were a few players that I was pretty disappointed by. Jordan Dawson and Brayshaw, sub 100 scores. We were expecting a lot more from them. Max Gawn only got 89 in the end. Matt Kennedy hasn't been the greatest since I've picked him up, only on 85 with that game. Luke Jackson probably would have wanted a bit more from him with the 89. But the 2 players that I'm incredibly pissed off about was Will Ashcroft, who I picked over Zach Merritt a couple of weeks ago as a trade, and Angus Sheldrick with only 49. lines. So we'll get to my trades in a moment, but they are definitely the ones who I'm keeping in the gun at the moment. Now, my brother's week, he actually scored less than me, which is really good because I've been able to jump him in the league, which we'll get to in a moment. He scored 2,132. His rank for the round was 22,372. So not that great. He was able to change his captain in time from Bailey Smith. He changed it to Desire Wanganeen Miller. So how lucky was that? He got 145, of course, to 290. Very nice. Now, he had Lockie Ash with the 102. He had Colby McKercher as well. He had Tom Liberatore with the 138, probably his career best game, which was really nice to see for him in his game 250. He also had Brian Myers with the 102, who was really good as well. Now, you may notice here, though, that he did have a player out, Bailey Smith, and didn't have a reserve. So that means he did miss out on some score from a potential rookie. May have been a Rouston or someone if he had him in the midfield. However, did miss out on that. So a couple of lesser lights for him. He did have Jordan Clark, who was watched by Braden Campbell in the Swans game. Only got 46 in the end. Well done from Braden Campbell, by the way. Really good job. Loved his role. Rory Laird only got 76, along with Tom Stewart, who I actually failed to mention last week. Ned Long only got 78 after a pretty disappointing performance. He had Tristan Cherry, I had Rowan Marshall, so Tristan Cherry only got 96. He's been a little bit down on form in more recent times, and Neil Erasmus, not a great performance from him, only got 41. The Dockers midfielder there / forward. Didn't do a lot in the game against Sydney, but a lot of players really lowered their colours, in my opinion, in that game against the Swans. So not really great signs there for my brother. But of course, with the trades, you can change up everything. Now, my trades for this week are Sheldrick out for Dawson, which is North Melbourne's Will Dawson. Played a couple of games, and I've got rid of Will Ashcroft, and I've picked up Zach Merritt. So first of all, the Sheldrick move, I've picked up a defensive rookie. Now, the reason for that is I have changed McCarthy, the West Coast mid-season draftee, moved him into the midfield now. So he's basically my 8th midfielder. So I'm banking on a rookie. However, I do trust that he's going to have a better output than Angus Sheldrick. I think that West Coast really want to go through him because he's such a good user of the football. So I'm going to be putting my faith into Tom McCarthy. So that does mean that I have picked up a defensive rookie to then go into my defensive reserves. McCarthy's in the team. Now, Will Ashcroft going out for Zach Merritt. Now, I could have gone a lot higher, of course, because I have a lot of cash there with that trade from Sheldrick. However, the reason why I've gone with Zach Merritt is I think it proved last week that he is a midfielder and needs to be there for the rest of the year for the Bombers if they're going to be able to, potentially get a win, because they've got a lot of injuries right now. They need their big midfielder in the midfield and not playing on the wing or at halfback, whatever the fuck he's been doing. Scored 145 against the Gold Coast Suns. I think he's back to his good form. His price is probably the lowest it's going to be at around $9.38. So I'm going to be going with that trade at this stage. Will Ashcroft out, getting rid of him. I think that's a decent move right now. Have 362 cash in the kitty right now. So at the moment, I'm looking at probably trading out maybe a Jake Bowie, Tom Stewart, maybe an Isaac Rankin, which may be a bit of a surprise after his score of 100 last week, but he had to get 5 goals to get there. So that's one that I'm really looking at this stage. But I think my team overall is in a pretty good position at the moment. Now, my brother's trades for this week are Madden out for Blackiston and Long out for Zach Merritt. Now, he had that as Matt Rowell, I believe. He had it as Noah Anderson originally, but changed it to Zach Merritt when he realized that I made that trade. And he's like, oh, that's a good idea to copy his team. No, he didn't do that. He said that he needed the cash, so that's why he's picked up Zach Merritt. But the Madden trade to Blackiston is purely for cash generation. Ned Long, I think it's probably a good time to get rid of him now. Who knows? He may be able to score really well going into the rest of the year, but I think it is probably the right time to get rid of him and to go to a player like a Zach Merritt. Probably people will be making that trade throughout the week, I would assume. But I do think that's a good move to make Zach Merritt the trade now. I think overall my team's in a pretty good spot at this stage. Hopefully Bailey Smith is back this week against the Giants because I really missed out on his score over the week. But overall I think my team's sitting in a pretty good spot. I'd like to have a forward reserve that's scoring right now. I wish I picked up Archer May from Essendon in the first couple of games. Now he's probably too high a price to pick him up. But overall, pretty happy with my team at this stage. And my brother's trades, just trying to command a point, let's be honest. Anyway, finally, let's get to the AFL Fantasy ladder. So at the moment, the Cheetah Cubs has jumped into top spot after a very good performance from him, by the way, 2,419. He's been up and around the mark for a lot of this year, jumped back into top spot after losing it last week. Delusional Fools is in second. Len Never Pretends is in third. Welshman in fourth. So the top four is sitting pretty normal right now. Tex Wonkers Love that name. With the in 5th spot, Knick Knack Paddywhack. You guys are pretty creative with your names. I'm going to be honest with you. Mine's pretty shit. 6th place is Knick Knack Paddywhack Goonaville. Don't mind the name either there, dude. He is in 7th. Wizards of Bontsville. Not bad. With in 8th spot, the X-Men. I think it's a little bit too serious, that name, I'm going to be honest. In 9th. He's a Swans fan though, so I'm going to give him a reprieve. And 10th spot is Kados. So not too bad from him. A lot of people are picking a pretty decent team, it does seem now. I did not beat anyone in the top 10 in terms of scores. I was pretty close to the X-Men, but he did drop down, so nearly got him, but that was basically it. Now, on the other side of it though, with my good score, I was able to jump right up. So I was in 46th spot last week. I'm in 41st now. I jumped in front of my brother by, how much is that? 30 points after that performance. That's it. 30 points I jumped in front of him by. So it's very close in that sort of area right now. You've got between, 39th to 43rd. There is a 41 point difference. So there's a bit of a log jam around that 40th point, guys. I'm still trying to get into the top 30. I think I'm probably a bridge too far from that point, but top 40 wouldn't be too bad. I just want to beat my brother at this point. He is 1 spot behind me with 30 points behind me as well. So it's going to be tough. He's trying to copy my team as much as possible. So make sure to let him know down below, because he reads the comments of these videos. Make sure to let him know how much of a copycat he is, because he's trying to keep up with me. But overall, pretty good week in the end. I think that I'm setting up my team pretty nicely for the end of the season though. So I've only got about 7 more rounds of the season to go. Hopefully in the next couple of weeks, I can start averaging, the 100 point per player. Basically around 2,300 because of 22 players plus the extra 100 for a captain. That's what I kind of want to aim for now, getting into the rest of the year. Hopefully get around that 2,400 mark as we get really towards the bookends of the season. But guys, that's pretty much all we got for the review for AFL Fantasy this week. Make sure to let me know down below how your team is going. If you are in our league, make sure to let me know where you are ranked as well. And finally, guys, we get to our fan favorite segment, the Flog of the Week. And this week, it's going to someone that probably most people have said in the past, this guy is the biggest flog in the AFL media. Now, I personally don't mind him, but I think this take is terrible. And this week, the Flog of the Week nominee goes to Kane Cornes. Now, you may be a bit surprised because he has not got a nomination this year. So, what has he done? I mean, he says so many things all the time. What has he done this week? So, my issue with Kane Cornes this week, and the reason why I'm giving him the nomination, is because he has absolutely scorned the Richmond Football Club for playing Sam Lawler. So if you don't know what happened to Lawler on the weekend, I mentioned it earlier in the episode, but he pulled his hamstring in the opening minutes of the contest against the Cats. So not great, really sucks because he's been such an exciting young prospect for the Tigers this year. Pulled his hamstring about 6 weeks ago and then returned against the Cats this week. Now, Kane Cornes has come out with, the hot take that, the hot take merchant, I think, who was it? The boxer, Volkanovski. He was the one who called him that in the Sportsbet promo. And it's so perfect to call him that, the hot takes merchant. That's all he does. So he came out on his AFL show, what's it called? Last Takes or something. What's it called again? Fuck, I forgot. First Up. So he came up on his show, on the AFL First Up show, and said that he thought the risk of playing Sam Lawler seriously backfired on the club this week. And now you may think that it was a risk to play him. However, according to the Richmond doctors, who are, medical experts, by the way, said that the reason why he didn't play last week is because they wanted to be super cautious on him. So they played him this round, and unfortunately, he pulled a hamstring. Something that is been an issue for him in the past, Sam Lawler. Now, you may think, yes, they should have rested him again. However, the route that Kane Cornes goes down here is unbelievably stupid. So the person who's on his co-host on the show, Sarah Ollie, actually says to him, that the Richmond Football Club came out and said that they, rested him last week because they wanted to give him extra time to have his hamstring heal and give him that extra precautionary week to then give him a go, and he should be fine. And maybe it was just bad luck. And he was like, oh, look, I don't know. I mean, if he's having a hamstring injury, games don't matter at the moment in winning games for Richmond. It's all about Sam Lawler being healthy. And it's like, the main the thing is, this club needs wins. And yes, you can say that they weren't going to win against Geelong. That's a fair statement. But also, they've got to get games into this kid. They can't just leave him to sit on the bench all the time and say, look, we have to save him. We have to keep him. He's not a wine bottle that you save for a huge special occasion. You still need him out there and playing games of football to get his fitness up for the AFL standard of football. And that's the only way as well, by the way, that his hamstring's going to be able to to stay healthy for an AFL career, is if he plays games. If he's just in the medical rooms all the time and he plays 30 games in his first 4 seasons because we don't want to risk his hamstring, it's like, well, he's never going to get good at the game, is he? We've seen the best of Sam Lawler already at AFL level this year, and granted, I think that they did need to take a precautionary route, but from my understanding and what I've seen, and from all the reports that Kane Cornes has seen, by the way, they took the most precautionary standards and watch on Sam Lawler. And unfortunately, he just pulled his hamstring. Why isn't Kane having why isn't he having this stance on other players pulling their hamstrings in the opening term? For example, Radicalea pulled his hamstring in the opening term for Port Adelaide on the weekend. Why isn't he getting all up in arms saying that Radicalea wasn't prepared for the game? Why? And I'm not someone who really sits on the side of Port Adelaide, he never takes aim on them, because I actually think he does to every now and then. He's definitely not as harsh as he probably should be on Port Adelaide, but there are times when he will go at them and, call them out for incidents in the game. But why is he so hell-bent on calling out the Richmond Football Club for this when it's a double standard, right? Like, why is he not calling out other clubs for this? He'll call out a Harley Reid for not being fit enough, but then he won't call out other players for not doing it, or they're not prepared for it. So I just think that he's got to either call them all out or you don't call any of them out. And I really hate the nitpicking that he does, that he picks on this player or picks on this club. It's really getting old. And even though I don't necessarily agree with what North Melbourne did about Harry Sheezel, I 100% understand why they did it and banned him from coming into the club rooms, because it was almost like he was fixated on Harry Sheezel, not getting enough scoring involvements and not being used enough or forward of the ball. He was so adamant on it, and the club eventually said, look, we don't want to hear it from you. We don't want you in the rooms. Why would we want someone in the rooms dealing with this crap from you? So I think that I think calling them out on this is incredibly dumb when the reporting even came out from the club before the game, by the way, that he could have played last week. So why would they say that if there was a risk? Because now they would look stupid. If they didn't say anything, they said, look, Lawler is ready to go. He's about right, so we're going to give him a go. If they said something like that, or they were like, they never mentioned that he was given an extra week just to make absolutely sure that hamstring was going to be okay. If they never said that, then I think Kane Cornes would have a decent point. But the fact that they came out before the game and said that the reason why they left him out last week was because they wanted to make absolutely sure that his hamstring would be fine, and it didn't, unfortunately. It's just unfortunate. Injuries happen in football. Hamstrings do happen. To say that he was unprepared or that they were risking him is so shit and so dumb. You're not a doctor, Kane. You can't say that he was 100%. He was like going into this game with an injury cloud, or there was a huge risk to be taken, because I don't think there was. I think it was just unfortunate what happened. And to say that the games don't matter or the wins don't matter, I'm sure the Richmond Football Club give a fuck about it. I'm sure the Richmond fans give a shit. So to say that it doesn't mean anything, the games don't really matter for him right now. It's like, of course they fucking matter. They need to get games into this kid. And the fact that they're not, the fact that you're saying, they should have rested him for another week or another week or another week. Literally what he said in the show is like, if he's not exactly, if they're not being precautionary with it, if that wasn't precautionary enough, they should have rested him another week and another week. All right, well, why don't we just rule him out for the rest of the fucking season or the next 2 years so he can get his fitness absolutely right. Anyway. That's my rant for this week, guys. That's the flog of the week going to Kane Cornes. It's just ridiculous the way he came out and said about that. That's pretty much the whole episode. I really appreciate you guys checking out the new episode. So, also, I forgot, I don't mention it enough, but if you do become a member, you can watch this live on the channel, the podcast, and you get a bunch of exclusive perks of new episodes as well. But thank you for watching this episode of the podcast. If you did enjoy it, make sure to leave a like and subscribe over on YouTube. And if you did listen to it over on Spotify, make sure to leave us 5 stars and make sure to follow us, notified on the podcast and the review that we post over there every single week. But again, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. We'll catch us all next week.